People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
I got a job.
Got a job or did a job?
Got a job. A real job.
May I ask your name?
Rafael. When do you want me back?
Let's say 1 week. Yeah, 1 week.
Whatever you do, think of the children first.
Tomorrow morning, Father, I'm gonna walk into a room, and some men are gonna kill me. They're gonna kill me.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Mr. Jedidiah Ayres.
Be in the movies, Tonto.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Spencer Parsons.
I think Salivation Army is added to my permanent lexicon after The Brave.
Our look at rare, overlooked, or seldom seen films continues with one that is relatively easy to find outside of these United States, The Brave, based on the book by Gregory McDonald, yes, the guy that wrote Fletch, and adapted by Paul McCudden. The film stars and was directed by Johnny Depp. Here he plays Rafael, a Native American who, in desperate need of money for his family, decides to sell himself to a group of shady men who cast him in a snuff film. We will be spoiling this film as we go ahead, so if you don't want anything ruined, track down the movie. Like I said, it's available on DVD via import, but never officially released in the US for reasons. Jedidiah, was this a first-time watch for you?
Actually, no. I saw it probably 20 years ago, a little bit more than that. I was working at a bookstore, and there was another cinema nut there, and he had a copy of it, and he loaned it to me. Actually, I think he had a VHS copy of it that he loaned to me. So I'm not sure where he got that, but I watched it and I remembered it. It was memorable, but it didn't make I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it in the last 20 years before this opportunity to talk about it. Yeah, I've watched it a couple of times recently, and my impression of it has improved. I do think it's a little more noteworthy than I originally thought.
How about you, Spencer?
Yeah, this is my first time seeing it, though its reputation really precedes it. Quite a notorious premiere at Cannes that I remember reading about back in the day, and it definitely is the kind of thing that had it been available in the United States more easily, I would definitely have wanted to check it out, but kind of forgot about it for a long time because it just wasn't very available. Yeah, I was excited to finally check it out. And yeah, we'll get into it, but I think it's a really fascinating, singular kind of movie. It's nothing else quite like it. And a lot more interesting than I expected. Initial response, it definitely suggested something more incompetent than I think this is. So yeah, I'm excited to dig in.
I don't remember the Cannes response. How was that?
Treated as a total embarrassment. Johnny Depp is quoted in one place. This was a hard experience for him, maybe harder than I think he let on. He took a punk rock, fuck you sort of response to American critics. But yeah, he talked about feeling attacked, like how dare he direct a film in the responses. And, I'll be honest, I like hunting down this kind of hated film from festivals like Cannes. And generally, it's a little easier to eventually catch up with them. But yeah, just I guess because of when it happened, too much time passed before maybe I could have chased it down and I lost some interest. But yeah, it was really despised and was treated as incompetent and an embarrassment, not just to Johnny Depp, but to Cannes for running it, which I think is more telling about the people that have that opinion. And that's without thinking that it's a really great film. I just think this is the kind of thing where you're telling on yourself a bit if this is the biggest embarrassment you've ever witnessed.
Yeah, I'm very curious to talk about that as we go along, because this one, yeah, you wave a lost film in front of my nose or a you shouldn't be watching this kind of movie, and I'm right there. I'm like, okay, well, now I need to track this thing down. So I think I tracked it down probably 98, 99, something like that. And it's the thrill of the chase rather than the actual... Once you get it in your hand, it's like, okay, it's going up on the shelf and I kind of forget about it. One of these days I'm going to watch that movie. And it just sounded so fucking depressing. I was like, this guy sells himself to be in a snuff film. Okay. Wow. How am I going to process that? And yeah, it's not the most uplifting film in the world because the material itself is so depressing, but I think it was handled with a lot of respect. I think it was a really good adaptation. I mean, we'll hear from Paul McCudden later on, and he doesn't necessarily like this adaptation. For him, it strayed a lot from where he was going with the screenplay. It was ironic. I was watching some press conferences and interviews from that period of time at Cannes, and Depp is like, oh yeah, well, I wrote the first draft. I'm like, no, you didn't. You and your brother rewrote the draft and changed some things around, but you didn't write the first draft of this, and it was going around before. I don't know if it was the stuff too that happened before this movie was made that also colored what happened.
I tend to think so. This is one where I think this is a film maudit in the truest sense. It is cursed. This is like truly a cursed film.
I 100% agree. And it's really weird, too, because I was looking at other movies. Like I just watched Fletch Lives recently, and I really have never gotten into the Fletch phenomenon until starting to do this Chevy Chase podcast that we also do. So that was really my excuse. I think that was maybe the second time I ever watched the original Fletch, and then second time watching Fletch Lives was just a couple weeks ago. I didn't realize that McDonald's work had been adapted one other time with a movie called Running Scared from 1972 that David Hemmings directed. And that is also a lost film, as in I cannot, the guy who's such a mad dog when it comes to tracking down movies, I cannot find that movie whatsoever. And I'm like, so two of this guy's adaptations are lost to America, and one of them is lost to the world. And then I watched Confess Fletch. So nothing to do with this whatsoever.
I was really happy for the chance to rewatch Confess Fletch. Because I really love that movie, yeah.
That's a lot of fun, right? I really thought that John Hamm captured that pretty darn well, though I have to say that the original Fletch films, that was kind of ideal for Chevy Chase, and I don't know why he didn't make a third or fourth or fifth. It seems like it was ready-made for him to be in a series. I guess maybe because Fletch Lives didn't do that well, and that one wasn't based on McDonald at all, just based on the characters. So I think they made a poor mistake by not actually adapting the books like they should have.
My guess is that would just be a budgetary thing, like more expensive to license another book rather than make something new with the character you already have a license for.
So the film really takes place for me in about 3 main locations. There's the office building that he goes to where he meets Marshall Bell, and I think it's the same office building where he meets Marlon Brando, who had worked with Depp on, Don Juan DeMarco. So I guess they had become fast friends at that point. That was also a big selling point of this is, oh, look at Marlon Brando's in this movie. And he does a fine job, though he's only in, one scene really? And then he shows up towards the end. But I don't know if those almost look like outtakes towards the end. Like they didn't get this guy for a second day. They probably just paid him $1 million for one day kind of thing.
He looks a lot different at the end. So the first scene he's in, he's got that long hair, is all a mess, and he looks very bedraggled. And then at the end, all the hair's pulled back, a tight ponytail, and he looks a lot more put together. And I thought, wish we understood why. He's not playing harmonica at the end.
I think there's a little bit of a comment in the book that didn't quite make it into the movie, where the title of the book is the title of the film, the snuff film that he's going to make, which I think comes out of the tradition of very careless ethnic casting of Native Americans in Hollywood movies. Anyone that's looked ethnic could be cast. There's that great joke in Blazing Saddles with the Yiddish-speaking Indians.
Has die gesehen in deiner Leben? They darker than us. Woof.
And then, of course, thinking about Johnny Depp playing Tonto in The Lone Ranger several years later and the kind of blow up around representation that started. It's really interesting. It's a different time, but I do suspect that there would have been some similar blowback if it had been released in American theaters at the time. It's certainly not nearly the same as with The Lone Ranger, but that's one of the aspects of the film that is, at once like really a fascinating attempt to try to understand something, and also in a very problematic tradition of using Native Americans, indigenous people in America, as allegories for all manner of different problems in the world. And I did find it interesting that the screenwriter was really disappointed that his Christ allegory was scrubbed out of it. And that definitely is something that's also in the book. But I'll be frank, I think that's one of Johnny Depp's good moves. In fact, because the situation, and it is a very stripped down kind of allegorical treatment. There are definitely scenes that are highly allegorical messages built in throughout the film. But I think just embracing that sense of how allegorizing Native Americans in American history, not very directly, and not importing kind of Christian mythology into it.
Need Indians for a Norman Steele Western. I'm a writer. Ted Oakham. Think about that thing. Writers come and go. We always need Indians.
Marlon Brando famously all about Native American causes, having Sacheen Littlefeather go and pick up his Oscar and everything at the ceremony where he was supposed to win for, what was that, The Godfather, I think? So this movie really addresses a lot of problems that Native Americans were having at the time and probably still having today, and just being completely disenfranchised. Though it's interesting in the book, they don't really ever say for sure that he is Native American. They say, oh, are you Italian? Are you Mexican? Are you this? Are you that? And they just kind of assume that he's an Indian.
It also feels like Depp's approach to it is to treat this as, I want a horrifying crime, but also more of a philosophical experiment. This notion of death and what the image of someone dying and their pain can reveal is the pitch from Brando's character, whereas in the book and in the original screenplay, it is much more of, to be quite frank, intended as pornography. And I find that to be an interesting divergence in this movie, because again, this is all tricky and problematic, but in another interesting way, it speaks directly to not merely the exploitation of Indigenous people, which it takes as a given, but it also deals with this idea of Indigenous people as a kind of allegory, thought experiment for the benefit of white people. I found that to be an interesting take, because obviously then the movie itself is doing the thing that I think it means to critique. There is this history that is very uneasy that I felt that moment of the film drawing on in a way that I wouldn't necessarily call it deep, because I think it's so sparse. The scene is so sparse and it's referential. So I don't know that I can really quite make an argument that it's mounting a philosophical case, but at the same time, it's referring to, I think, a bigger philosophical idea than the notion of pornographic snuff film. Doug?
Yeah, I think it was a good call by Depp to take it out of the screenplay, because it was in that original screenplay too, pretty much straight out of the book. And it's a horrifying description of what awaits him. Is the idea of it is heavy enough to cast, as you said, we were already maybe avoiding it because we know what the plot is, and it sounds so depressing. That might have really taken it over the edge, put that in the film.
Yeah, it's like the whole Iron Eyes Cody thing. This guy, he was actually Sicilian, but he became like the most famous Native American that we ever saw on screen. He's the guy who's like crying in the commercial and stuff, I want to say. Yeah, it's just like, I think Depp can pass if he wanted to, and he kind of does in this. He looks very natural amongst the actual Native Americans. And then you get, like Louis Guzman, and I'm trying to remember the other actor's name. So they're more Latino, but I think it's just like, again, disenfranchised people. So it really becomes, the place where Depp and all of his friends live is a literal garbage dump. Like, they are the scavengers of the world, just going through the garbage dump and trying to fix things up, resell things. You meet the Frederick Forrest character, who's got this weirdo voice that he's doing in here with his, I guess, maybe mentally challenged son, played by Max Perlich, who used to be like what Parker Posey was to women roles in independent films. Max Perlich was to male roles in independent films, insofar as he would show up in everything. It was like, I think him and Steve Zahn probably had like a turf war as far as who's like the most indie of the independent actors. And he was everywhere for a long time. I think he even shows up in Dead Man, which is another movie where Johnny Depp plays a Native American as well, playing William Blake. Though, wait, actually, I take that back. He's adopted by the Native Americans. He's not a Native American in that one, because there is an actual Native American, if not more than one. But I do remember the one guy, like really telling him off, which was pretty great. It's been a long time since I've seen that movie, but I remember really enjoying it when I saw it. And yeah, you're right about the whole thing with the snuff film that they want to make. They actually tell him, because they don't talk too much about it in this, but they really go into a lot of detail in the book for sure. But talking about how they want to put like a white stripe across his nose, like war paint, and just really, play it up, this whole thing. Like, I think they'll probably even put like a feather in his head kind of thing, in his hair, just to be like, oh yeah, here's this brave Native American, and we're killing this person. And some of the details they go into in the book. And I like that McDonald actually in the beginning of the book is just like, yeah, there's a chapter in here that is really rough to read, but I really had to put it in here. If you want to skip it, go ahead and skip it. But I really had to have this here because it looms over the rest of the book.
Yeah. It's like Marlon Brando's character, the McCarthy character, is one who has changed maybe the most. It's changed a lot, though, from the book and the original screenplay to the film, in that you don't really buy into it. you do think this guy is just a sleazy criminal and things like that. But you do think that he sells the idea that he believes his own bullshit in the scene where he talks about the service that he provides and that he's asking Johnny Depp to provide. Whereas in the book, in the original treatment, that the Rafael character, the Johnny Depp character, is really a lot more kind of naive, and being that sort of devastating reveal at the end of the book where you get the contract, you see the contract. It was written out, and it's just nonsense it's just a couple scribbles on a piece of paper, and he was just really let alone do pretty much. And so the character, of course, doesn't give the speech that Brando gives in this, but it changes a lot. And I'm not sure that it works entirely. There's a lot of elements of this film that I think are really good that seem to be existing in a different film than other elements that I think are good. They don't quite gel into a satisfactory whole, but taken on their own, I think, oh, that's interesting and that's worthwhile. And I'd watch that movie that was consistent with that. And I'd watch the movie that's consistent with other elements that are in opposition to that in this film.
The way that Brando sells it in the movie, for me, really reminds me of the film Martyrs. That whole idea of like, you see the face of God in the person that is about to martyr themselves. And with this, it seems very much like, yeah, we're looking for that kind of thing. But there is that tinge of, and that really gets us off. Like, that is the ultimate orgasmic material, is seeing somebody who is losing their life for us.
It reminds me of the James Mason movie, Odd Man Out. He's dying throughout the film, and the artist goes from vignette to vignette as people discover him and how they react to him. But the artist is obsessed with painting his face because he knows he's dying, and he's not really concerned about his fate. It's just for his art. He's got to paint this face because, he mumbles that same stuff about seeing God and seeing the truth in that, consistent throughout film history, I think.
I think they make a better point in the book and the screenplay than they do in the realized film as far as, will he get the money at the end? And when you read the book and when you read the screenplay, you know that he's not. You know that he is completely illiterate, that he cannot read the contract. Like you said, it's just a whole bunch of nonsense. And he's never going to get that money for his family. So what he ends up getting, at least in the book, as far as I remember, it's a very paltry sum that he gets. And he goes through the same thing. He gets like, it's like a deposit, but yet the Marshall Bell character is just like, why would we give you money? That doesn't make any sense. Why would we give you anything at all? Because you're just going to waste it. You're just going to go get drunk. You're just going to throw this all away. We're not going to give you shit. But they end up giving him a little bit of money, and he goes out and does what he does in this, as far as like, oh, I'm going to buy stuff now. I'm going to buy stuff for my family. I'm going to buy some new clothes. And then every single time he tries to do something nice, people are after him and in his shit and just being like, what'd you do? How'd you steal this money? Like in this movie, it's, what robbery did you do? Like, you're going to go to jail. And there's this whole thing. It is interesting as far as his wife and his kids keep thinking he's going to go back to jail, that he's going to be out of their lives soon. He is going to be out of their lives soon, but it's for a completely different reason. And it's for the sacrifice that he's trying to do to them. But he's such a fuck up that they're never going to see one red cent out of this.
There's a toggling between genuinely playful, kind of fun moments. The trip to the grocery store, I think in particular, which even has this like, on their way home, they have this enormous bird. It looks like an ostrich that they've even put a flannel shirt onto as they're headed home from the grocery store on the bus, that they've made such an outrageous kind of purchase with the grocery cart filling up. And then, yeah, there's this giant gray plucked bird beyond a turkey that they take home. There are these like kind of wild moments. And then metronomically after each one, somebody wants to know, whether it's his wife or Luis Guzman or other characters, the priest, they all want to know, how did you steal this? Where did this come from? Are you going to jail? This is going to seem like a really nutty comparison, but this movie is an interesting twin with Preston Sturges's Christmas in July, which has a similar messed up situation. Preston Sturges is one of the funniest filmmakers ever. And this is one of my favorite films of his, but I don't find it funny at all. It's so stressful. It's like a Fassbinder movie because the premise is that this guy is being tricked into thinking that he's won this big prize. And so he goes on a spending spree and throws a little carnival for the kids in his neighborhood that's very much like carnival that seems to get bigger and bigger as the Brave goes on. And with everything that he buys, I'm just like, no, don't do it. Don't do it. This is different because like in the one case, he's been tricked. But I think Sturges is working a similar kind of allegory about American capitalism and consumer capitalism in particular, that all involved, Depp, various writers are all kind of tapping into in a kind of similar way. But Depp really loves that carnival to a point that it's one of the things I love it too, but it unbalances the film. There are so many, it's one of the reasons why it's 2 hours long, is that there's so many shots and they're elaborate shots moving among all the different carnival rides with the kids and all this kind of stuff. And it's even mysterious. Where did all this money come from? How did he do this? How is he showing it off? But it's interesting because in the Sturges, we know that eventually this guy is going to find out that it's a ruse and that he's spent all this money that he doesn't have and it's going to ruin him. And in this movie, we know that all the money is coming from torture and death that Depp is going to have. I doubt that Johnny Depp was thinking of Christmas in July, but I do think that these two movies make for a really interesting sort of comparison given their like parallel setup and then the specifics of the imagery that they get into. It's not the coffee, it's the bunk. Absolutely one of my favorite movies ever. Lady Eve can only edge it out because of Barbara Stanwyck and because it really is like the funniest movie I've ever seen.
I love that reveal of the carnival scene when you see him and he's like jumping on a trampoline and then the camera is like just doing the slow pan. So you see him doing one thing and then it's completely seamless from him. Actually, it's him opening up a refrigerator, showing all of the stuff that he stocked it with. And then the camera keeps panning and then boom, he's on a trampoline. And I like that he's kind of moved under there and then some balloons come up to kind of mask the cut. And then he's on a kind of makeshift merry-go-round. And I thought that was really nice, the way that he presented all this and that he's the one going through all of these rides and kind of like exploring and showing like, hey, wife and kids, look at all of this stuff. And yeah, it is completely nuts that he would do this. And it is something that his wife is just like, you woke us up in the middle of the night to show us this. Like, what are you doing? Where did you get this money? Yeah. When are you going to be going to jail? And she lays him out with a punch right across the jaw. And I love it. I love her character. I think the only character I love more is the Marshall Bell character because Marshall Bell is just always amazing. And to see him in this, he loves playing these unhinged characters. Like, of course, when he shows up in Starship Troopers.
Oh, God! We're gonna die! Don't you understand? We're all gonna die!
Control yourself, General.
Quado in Total Recall and stuff. Oh, it's so good. But yeah, here he's just he's the right arm of the Marlon Brando character, and he just seems to show up all the time. And I guess he's almost like an angel of death type character who just keeps showing up. And like at one point, Depp has to put all of these bottles like kind of slung over his shoulders, and he's going to get water from this creek. And I'm just like, oh man, that water is probably so dirty and so filthy. And Belle even says, like, no wonder you people die so early if you're drinking that kind of stuff. And he's just there to taunt Depp almost the entire time, to taunt him and then also to hurt him. There's one scene later where, and I'm guessing it's the other guy that was in the office with Belle when we first meet him.
I recognize him, and I checked it out a couple of times and then just decided, no, it's like a bizarre sort of, it reminds me of the theatrical punishments of various apparatchiks in the trial for the benefit of Joseph K. I'll be coming back to Kafka again in relation to this. But yeah, it was like a strange, not quite recognizable person, but Depp reacts in a way that seems not just like he's shocked that there's this victim of his tormentor, but also that he seems to recognize him, which I guess he would in such a small community. But it's a really strange moment.
I'm pretty sure it is the Wizzy character, the Chuck Weiss character, who's in the office at the beginning, in Marshall Bell's office. But what the significance of that character is, outside of showing up twice and Depp being pretty thrown off by him when he's alive, so I guess he'd be as thrown off by him dead. What purpose he serves other than to be a cameo, I'm not sure.
Fucking Marshall Bell just sitting out there by his van, has a very shallow grave dug, just kind of, and it's like the middle of nowhere, but Depp ends up running across him. And I'm like, okay, this feels very much like a moment of fate. And it's basically like, oh yeah, see what I'm doing to this guy? Like it's almost like that long goodbye thing where it's like, this guy is my friend. Imagine what I would do to somebody who's not my friend.
The figure of that character and like the setting in a garbage dump and a lot of elements of the movie, abstract, even the desert setting is used in this kind of absurdist fashion, like really stripping things down to icons and allegory. Absurdism isn't as allegorical as this movie is, but there's a real strain of absurdism here. Then, Jed, you mentioned this, the different movies and how they fit together. Absurdism doesn't generally veer into such sentimentality as The Brave does in some moments. But I'm not going to say that it works. Like, I don't exactly want to throw down for this as a great movie or even altogether a good movie, but I find it a fascinating movie in the way that it is using these kinds of influences sometimes quite well, and at other times can't quite make them fit together. In the book as well, there's a strong kind of stripped down absurdist streak that I think in some ways the limitations of doing this movie on its budget militates toward absurdist world that then also includes is some more standard melodrama and exploitation. It is absolutely an exploitation film setup. Some of the reviews referred to it as a kind of neo-Western, and I don't think that is actually the case. I think this is more like one of those rural noirs. This is more in a tradition of a kind of faded character in a crime narrative than particularly a Western setting. It is obviously the place is like the West, but that's not really what puts you in the West as a genre. And I think we've got something that's much closer to a crime film, which is again related. I don't know if this is the case as an influence on the novel, but related to the trial and other Kafka absurdist stories that are about guilt and crime, following characters in an extremely abstract and therefore almost supernatural kind of fashion.
I can almost see this being like a DOA, but with that, Edmund O'Brien is going to die because he's been poisoned. In this movie, it's like the world is poisoned, and Depp is going to die by the end of this.
I think one of the standout qualities of the film is really the production design, because as you noted, the book is very stripped down. There's a lot of detail in the dump and things like that. but you don't really come away reading the book with a very good idea of what things really look like. And the film put together this world, and they put together a really fascinating world. It doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't have to when you're in these sort of fantastic and allegorical spaces, but they do such a good job of grounding the world in some areas that it does butt up against the more fantastic elements of it. Like they've got to go up the dirty creek to get water, but they've got electricity everywhere. They've got a TV. In fact, my favorite detail of the carnival that he builds and sets up is that right in front of it is a comfy chair with a giant TV in front of it. So you could just sit in the comfy chair and watch TV. You don't have to actually play on the carnival world. You could just sit there and watch TV. That seems like a nice touch. But there's a really nice shot early on, the first introduction to the little community that they live in, where there's a woman with a very tiny patch of grass that she is watering. She's got a fence around it with stones, and it is very guarded. She is just trying to make something grow in this really dusty, horrible place. But several shots of characters in there with fresh vegetables and peppers and things like that they're stringing together. And it's like, well, I don't understand how all the fresh vegetables are there if you make such a point of this patch of grass being so precious. So there's just all these nice, really great details that are, like I said, really grounded in reality at times, that almost like a Terry Gilliam film. And I guess probably right after this was Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. So who knows if Depp was already thinking of Gilliam, but the Fisher King quality to it, or Brazil sort of quality, where those films go in and out of fantasy very seamlessly, but clearly the audience really understands what's a fantastic vision and what the reality of it is there. Especially the carnival scene and scenes and things like that really deserve that otherworldly. Does it really look like this? Is it, or is this just amplifying the emotional, the ecstatic reality of their emotional state? Really, hats off to the production design and to Depp for orchestrating some of those great shots and great scenes. But again, two good and strong elements that don't really gel for me in the film. I'd have been happy to see either one of those films that really lean into the one aspect more. No, it's Guzman. I don't think that's right.
I have a dumb question for you guys, because I was reading, there's not that much written about this movie, unfortunately, but I was reading some reviews last night, and one person was writing about how Depp kills the Marshall Bell character. I don't remember him killing Marshall Bell. Did I forget something and just completely blank out on this? And they even talked about him being covered in blood and stuff. I'm like, did he kill Bell on his way after, like, doing a Mike Tyson on Louis Guzman and murdering Louis Guzman? It's like, no, that's not in here. So yeah, it is interesting though that Guzman kind of takes the place of Bell, because Bell, not only is he a threat, he's not really a threat for Depp. He's more of a threat to Depp's family. He's like, if you don't go through with this, I'm going to murder your family. And then when Guzman shows up, and it's almost like a swap, because at one point around, like, I don't know, an hour or something, maybe it's like an hour 10, something like that, Bell just disappears. It's like that last scene that we saw with the shallow grave is the last time that we see him. And then Guzman shows up maybe right before that and starts to become this threat. And then he, again, is the one that's threatening Depp's family. He's just like, oh, if you don't cut me in on this deal, I'm going to be taking care of your wife. And there's one point where he talks with him Actually, I think that might be Bell, where he like goes running home to make sure that his family's okay. And that's also interesting too. You're talking about the whole Christ metaphor, and what does Bell do the last time we see him? He pokes Depp right in the hand with it almost looks like a fire iron, and he's got the wound of Christ right there in his hand. He doesn't do it to both hands, but he's like got that there. And then Depp, that scene of him running through the desert and the blood and the moonlight and everything. I'm like, oh, that's pretty nice.
Guzman and Bell are related as a kind of pair or thematic twinning going on within the story. I do think that this speaks to the way that the larger allegory works about its world of depravity and exploitation, where it's possible for Rafael, Depp's character, to fight and kill Guzman, but ultimately the battle takes place among the working and criminal class and does not extend to overthrowing or in any way really opposing the wealthy people exploiting them. And the final images of the film, and this works a little bit differently from how the book can, because it's a purely sort of cinematic montage thing, is as heads toward his fate, we see all the trucks and the bulldozers come in to destroy the community that he's been living in. And his trailer that's much smaller on the outside than it is on the inside in a kind of wonderful, absurd fashion gets hoisted into the air as Depp is about to get into this elevator. And we left not knowing whether his money has allowed his family to get out of there in any meaningful way on time. And it seemed like probably not. He's not necessarily accomplished anything. But again, I think not knowing at the end, as these images are presented next to each other, Depp headed to his fate and the community in this garbage heap being destroyed. I think the ambiguity of it for me is actually more satisfying than having a real notion of, was the money delivered or not? The money in all of this becomes so secondary to the human concerns. Even if that family does receive, it's only $50,000. And even in late 1990s money, that's really not going to get them very far in the scheme of things, especially if they've been living in a garbage heap. It's really not that much. I find the ending of the movie, to me, more affecting than the book by far, because it's a final abstract and absurd playing out of the economics that are running the world that it takes place in.
Well, and that he comes back and gets in that elevator with no one else there. That he doesn't need the Marshall Bell character to watch over him. He's a dog coming back to the kennel, and just getting ready, or he's a pig coming back to slaughter kind of thing, because that's all he's doing. We've talked about this so many times on this show, the whole elevator ride to hell, Jedidiah, you were on literally the elevator to the gallows episode, right? So it's like, here he is getting on this elevator and he's just going to go into the depths, and we just get the doors closing. And that's how the movie ends, roll credits kind of thing. But yeah, it is interesting that Guzman is preying upon Depp and his family, and Guzman doesn't live in the dump, but he is basically of that criminal class and is, just preying on somebody that he shouldn't be preying on. And I think it's very telling too that the one, redemptive type character, the Clarence Williams III character, that is a African-American priest, not a white priest, that is taking care of him. And by him being Clarence Williams III, I'm like, okay, I can trust this person. I can trust that he is going to give that money that Depp gives to him to the family when he's done. And I love that moment at the end when he takes the collar off. It's just like, all right, he knows that he's broken his vow because he's basically aided in this self-made suicide of Depp's, and he really can't be a man of the cloth anymore. He basically sees the world for what it is, in my opinion.
Tells Depp that he's sold his soul, and Depp comes back with, no, I sold my body, which is I think, a pretty interesting rebuke under the circumstances. And I like that these characters are not terribly articulate. They can throw out these opposing points, and then there's larger implications that we can get at with them, but we're not going to get a full philosophical argument. This is not Dostoevsky, where we're going to get each one of those sides. And for the movie, I find that to be really effective and holds together even some of the less successful elements for me. One thing about this film, I'll veer into this direction, and this is one level in which I guess for me, this is both a plus and a minus. This is like an overgrown student film in so many ways. There are these big, grand ambitions to how the allegory is to work. And there's actually like some really beautiful technical work that I would really want to praise from Depp as a director. And the minus on a student film is, the pretension, and that the movie couldn't possibly live up to everything that it seems to be aiming at. But on another level, I'll take the pretension sometimes, even when it becomes laughable or when it doesn't fully hold together. I will say that it's refreshing to see a movie by somebody who's trying. Yeah, it's a bit of a white elephant, and myself, I prefer the termite art, but there are a lot of people not particularly termiting either who don't even go after very interesting kinds of white elephants. And it's an interesting film. There are really strange elements that don't quite go together. One thing, back to the student film thing, I want to praise Depp technically, and I think his work with the cinematographer is really excellent, but you can really see a big difference with most of the dialogue scenes. Almost any time there's dialogue, the camera just locks down into close-up shot and reverse for long periods of time. It's only with Guzman and Depp on screen at the same time. Oh, now we're going to get a walk and talk because we know that both of these actors are really capable of it. They're good for it. But in most other cases, Depp is not really, he does some amazing blocking and staging and some really nice and consistent narrational kinds of moves every time it's strictly visual that I really respect. And so first time that he directed, he's going to come down to an easier approach whenever he's got to do dialogue. But I don't know. There's some really beautiful shots where he's constantly revealing things about spaces. He reveals characters. There's the nice playful one that you described earlier, Mike, where he appears several times within the same long take. He's doing some really cool stuff. There's even a shot in it. I watched this 10 times to try to figure out what was going on, and I still don't have an answer to it. Probably my favorite scene in the movie is that bizarre wrestling match with the television that just suddenly goes rolling across the floor. And it's done in this like static, it's not exactly a wide, but as wide as you can get inside that trailer. It's done in a static, wide master as the TV starts to roll one direction, and then Depp's wife goes for it and she tries to wrestle it back to where it's going. And its sign-off is happening for TV, and you've got the national anthem playing and flags. And so wrestling with a TV that has flags on it is all too obvious. But then at the same time, I'm like, how is this? What is going on? How is this happening? And the sort of strange whimsy of it that doesn't seem to work by the same rules as the rest of the movie, I'm here for it. It even ends up with the TV going to static at the dead center of the frame as Depp comes in and grabs his family to take them outside to see what he's been up to. It's really strange, and I could never figure out what was supposed to be happening other than, I guess, maybe an homage to Poltergeist. It seems to be Poltergeist activity all of a sudden, and the use of that television. But wonderful stuff. Does it precisely fit? I don't know, and to some degree, I don't care. The movie is slow, it's too long, but again, it's slow and too long in a way. I'll take it in order to get such a bizarre, interesting jumble as what it serves up.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's not the old test pattern that they used to have sometimes with the Indian head. I was just watching a collection of commercials the other day that were called, I think it was something like, inappropriate commercials from I think it was from the 70s or it might have been the 80s. And just how often there were Native American characters in these commercials that were not portrayed by Native Americans, and they were just completely exploiting Native culture for selling things. And it was just like, oh, okay. I mean, there were inappropriate things other places too, like this whole ad campaign where these women are getting their skirts ripped off so they can show their underwear and legs and talk about how whatever product is working so well on their legs. I'm like, wow, we've come a long way, baby. And I think there was even a Virginia Slims commercial in there too. All right, we're going to take a break and we'll be back with an interview with screenwriter Paul McCudden right after these brief messages.
You see squaws in Big Powwow? They talk about big deal at Arrow Ford. You buy a car or truck this month only, you get free 100 gallons of gas plus a $100 gift certificate from Penny's. Buy lots of beads. Or you can apply to purchase. You want to know how? Come with me to my teepee. Just follow Arrow.
I'm here to tell you the story of how Red Pop began. A long time ago, our tribe was hot and thirsty, and the great spirit Fago appeared and said, "Here's a thirst-quenching, great-tasting soft drink just for you, and I call it Red Pop. You can share it with the early settlers when they come to America. It will give them something to give thanks for. And you, running Pudgy, be thankful for Diet Fago."
No, I am, Chief. I am.
Well, I want to know a little bit more about you and especially how you got into show business.
It's an odd story. I was a physics student. I was in graduate school in physics. In college at the University of Chicago, I had joined the legendary Doc Films, which is this student film club. It is the oldest film club in the country, and it's quite an intense experience. And I immersed myself in films to an extent that's really pretty frightening. And I watched everything. And it was just, I became so obsessed with films that when I got to graduate school in physics, I ran a film group at Harvard and spent more time doing that than doing my studies. I said, I'm going to take a year off and I'm going to try to think about something to do with movies. And I'd seen every film ever made, just about, but I had no experience in making them. So I said, maybe I'll apply to film school. They can teach me how to make movies. So I applied to NYU and USC and got in and said, I bet NYU is full of a bunch of film nerds that have seen as many movies as I have. So how about USC, where they probably know more about Hollywood and making films? So I went to USC, got an MFA, and originally was interested in being a cinematographer, but turned out I was no good at that at all, and just fell into writing and just wrote a bunch of student films. And then Brave came along and other things and just ended up writing. And it turned out to be really a great thing. Got an agent and all that and wrote for a while. And then I aged out, and I'm not interested in, they used to call them comic books. Now they call them graphic novels. But that's just not my scene. I wrote a lot of historical dramas and dramatic adaptations of things. And at the time, in the mid-2000s, Hollywood was becoming a franchise factory. And so there were fewer and fewer projects that were interesting to me. I did a few for HBO, which is great. But then that kind of petered out a little. And so I went back to teaching. So now I'm here in Colorado and I teach both physics and screenwriting.
That's quite a double major there.
Yeah, I know. Right brain, left brain. But as I tell people, they're both about thinking about the world clearly, one physically and one psychologically, and trying to explain how the world works, either physically or psychologically.
So you were going to Harvard and majoring in physics.
I was in a grad program. It was a PhD program in physics at Harvard. I know.
How disappointed were your parents?
God bless them. They were very tolerant, and they understood that I had to do what I needed to do. It was my mom probably who really got me obsessed with movies when I was a kid. I used to stay up late at night and
watch things like Dark Victory with her. We'd both be weeping. Yes. So they were pretty good about it. And then, of course, they got more interested. I had them come out to LA and we went to a few screenings and things, and it was fine. Should I have stayed and gotten a PhD and become a physicist? Who knows? But I had a great time in Hollywood and really enjoy storytelling. And to this day, still fiddle around with projects and work on things, and just am obsessed with the movies. Although Hollywood has become a very different place from when I was there. So,
what year were you graduating from USC?
I got my MFA in production there, and I think it was 1991, I think it was. Yeah, I went there in 86 and stuck around and did a couple of things while I was down there. And then that's actually part of the whole story of The Brave. But there was a feature film a bunch of us students worked on that was made by students at USC. It was directed by a professional director, but I took an extra semester to work on Zombie High. An incredible experience. I wouldn't wish it on too many people to watch, but it was a great experience. And it was the brainchild of, not to segue into the Brave stuff, but it was the brainchild of Aziz Ghazal, who I'm sure you've read about. And he was the stockroom manager at USC. They'd go in and out, kept track of it. And I worked there in the stockroom. And he had actually a really great idea, which was, hey, we got all these film students. They are dying to work on a feature film in 35 millimeter and work on professional equipment. Why don't we get a real producer and a real director, B producer and B director, and get them to raise a little money, and we'll have the entire crew be USC film students. And that's what we did. And I had a bunch of credits on it. I wrote things and I worked with the editors and all the stuff. But it was great. It was a great crash course. It's our version of Roger Corman. I think you can still find it on Netflix if you really want to torture yourself. It was really incredible. And working with a lot of people who are now really pillars of the Hollywood community. Bob Doucet, a lot of people worked on that. Yeah, that was a lot of 18-hour days. But we shot on Panavision 35 cameras. We used all our lighting equipment, and it was directed by someone that they actually hired, Ron Link. It is what it is, but it was a fantastic learning experience. I'll tell you that.
Well, how does The Brave come to you?
I had just graduated, worked on Zombie High, and like most film school graduates, I got a job working at a production company at Universal, reading scripts, assistanting. And one of my fellow students actually was there working the same thing, kind of story editor, script reader. And she came across a little blurb about The Brave, the novel. I think Publishers Weekly, as story editors do. See what's coming out. And she said, oh, this sounds like your kind of story, knowing my tendency to go for dark tragedies. And so we got a copy of it and I read it. And I think I had a good sense of story. And I read it and I said, oh, this is absolutely easily going to be an incredible film. It's written sparingly. I've never read the novel, but it's very sparing. It's very visual. It has a single protagonist. It's a clear arc. And of course, what appealed to me was the very clear Christ allegory. I said, I could write this in a weekend. I know exactly how this was going to look on screen. I had written a couple shorts at USC that had a kind of bleak, dark tone, and I just knew exactly what the tone of the story should be. And so I'm trying to remember, I think I wrote a letter to Gregory McDonald, the author of the book, wrote to his agent, and where did it go? Well, I said, to be honest, I think the first thing I did was I went to Aziz, and I said, because he was scrabbling to be a producer, I said, Aziz, I could write this if we could get somebody to give us money. It's no problem. And he didn't have any connections. I didn't really have any connections. So I wrote to McDonald. I think somehow we got his home address or his agent's address, and I wrote a letter. And I said, essentially, listen, I poured out my idea of what this film was about, what it would be about, how I would adapt it. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll write you the first act and I'll send it. You tell me what you think. If you don't like it, fine, just throw it in the trash. So I did it. I just wrote the first act, sent it to him. And he said, I love it. And he said, I'll option it to Aziz for a very small sum because he had no money. And that's what it did. And so then I wrote it. It got me an agent. It got a lot of attention. People loved it. Of course, anyone in the studio said, yeah, I love it. I can't make it here, obviously. It's a sort of a snuff movie. But they all said, oh, I'd love to make this. If I had a deal that was somewhere else, oh, I'd make this, yeah. And then kind of stuff began to happen. Not to go into too much, but Aziz was a volatile person. And he saw this as his ticket, as did I, which it was. And so we began to show it around and have meetings all over Hollywood with all sorts of people. And no one, of course, wanted to have him on board as producer. He was just a volatile person because he had technically optioned it. He was attached to it and refused to give it up. And we tried to say, listen, we can get this very big name people. We could get this made, but you're going to have to step down. He wouldn't. And there was some other personal things going on in his life. And this is where it gets really intense, but you can read about some of that stuff. I don't need to go into too much detail, but to be honest, yeah, I don't know, have you read the script? It's floating around somewhere. So
yes, I have.
And it's the story of a martyr. And as I said, it's a Christ allegory. And unfortunately, Aziz began to see himself in that role as someone who needs to sacrifice a lot. And a lot of stuff then went on in there. And ultimately, a very big tragedy happened. And then after we had been meeting with Oliver Stone and Jodie Foster, you name it, the big tragedy happened. And then it was just dropped like a hot potato. Understandable reasons. It was just this horrific tragedy. There's more I could say, but that was what happened. So then for a year or two, the rights were still in his name. It was just a nightmare. And so then a couple of young producers, Carol Kemp and Charlie Evans, had formed a company. They managed to buy the rights from his estate. I don't know exactly how they did that, but they did. And they said, okay, we're going to resurrect this, no pun intended, and see if we can't get this made. And to their credit, they did. They did the legwork and showed it around. And I was less involved with that at that point because they had the script. And they eventually, to make a long story short, found its way to Johnny Depp. This is where I have to just try to understand things from afar, but he liked it. And he said, yep, let's make this. However, I have to star in it and direct it. And so that's what happened. And I was really not involved, to be honest.
They just said, step aside, you're good.
Yeah. Once Johnny Depp got involved and he was rewriting it, which I discovered, and directing it and starring in it, I was the typical writer. I was watching from afar. I got to give Charlie and Carol credit. They did try to fight for me to be involved, but Johnny was not having it. I got to go to the set once. I, to this day, have not met Johnny. And then the film went to Cannes. And again, Charlie and Carol, to their credit, wangled me some tickets. So my wife and I got to go to the Palais. And we saw the film. And I don't know if you've seen it.
I have seen it.
You have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious about your thoughts about it.
I wasn't involved in the making of it. So it was interesting. A lot of choices made there that I wouldn't have made. That's all I can say, really. The main one, of course, being that it's not a Christ allegory itself. I think the story of that's not the central conceit. But that's okay. It was a great experience. It got me an agent. It got me a lot of work. And it taught me a lot. As I like to say, some people have a great beginning in Hollywood and they have some kind of terrible things happen to them later on. I had the terrible stuff happen right at the beginning.
Got it out of the way.
Get it out of the way. Get all that tragedy, all that real horrific stuff out of the way. So from then on, it was great. I got to meet some great people, write some great stories. But as I say, HBO was great. There were some great executives at HBO, some great projects. And me in the studios, I was always the one they would bring in to write their kind of pet projects and production company. I really want to do the story. I did a story in Joan of Arc and Lorenzo de Medici, and one on the Lockerbie plane disaster for Columbia. That was, I thought, turned out really well for Sean Connery's. But those were all production company projects that may or may not get made. Most, of course, didn't. Some other stuff I wrote an episode, I'm sure you know, From the Earth to the Moon. I think they were counting on my scientific background or something. But again, that one was a little rewritten, that episode, and that was a little frustrating. I saw it as Apollo 12 was the only all-Navy crew for the Apollo missions. So I wrote it as shore leave on the moon. And I don't think they saw it quite that way. I could say a lot more about the whole disaster, the disease and this tragedy, his family and all. And there were a lot of people caught up in that, and USC was caught up in it, and it was a big mess. And to this day, it breaks my heart what happened to him and his family and the survivors, his two sons. And I have to separate that from the gratitude I have for it really getting me to be able to write stories. Yeah, it's the oldest story in Hollywood. The writer sits there on the sidelines and pops his bubble sheets to keep the stress level down. It was what it was. It never got released, of course, for reasons you probably can tell.
I was curious how that experience was for you, kind of watching that unfold, as far as, because I've heard different theories as to why it wasn't released here, and I'm curious what your take on it was.
Charlie and Carol tried to sell it around, and I think a lot of it, to be honest, was there was just this kind of taint from the tragedy that had happened, and people just didn't want to be associated. It was just cursed in a way. It didn't help that the filmmakers maybe didn't understand the central meaning of the story, but I think there was just a lot of sense of, oh yeah, we met that guy, we met about this project, we loved it, but now there's just something untouchable about it. Had it been a different film, it might have gotten released, but it was. It is surprising to me that it never, 20 years, whatever it is, has really seen the light of day anywhere. And I think a lot of that is probably because the filmmakers prefer it that way, but I didn't. Just speculating.
Well, it is good that you're still able to get gigs and everything after that, because if the film's not released, maybe you just get swept away with that. So I'm glad that didn't affect you in that way.
Oh, no, I had a great career there for 15 years, writing great projects that are really, not all were great. Most of them were really fascinating. And I got to really, I enjoyed doing research into projects, into delving into historical ideas. And so that was great. I did one for HBO that I really liked, and I still think it would make a good film based on a true story about two identical twin Chinese brothers who were separated by the revolution. China, one, their father sent one to fight with the communists and one to fight with the nationalists, thinking one of them will survive. And that the brother fought the communists, went through this hell and high water and survived the revolution and lived in poverty. The one who fought the nationalists went to Taiwan, became a millionaire, ran a TV station. And then 40 years later, the one in mainland heard his brother's voice on the radio from Taiwan, and they were reunited. But they were no longer identical twins. They were now as different as two people can be. And in fact, they were not even brothers anymore. They were different worlds. That was a really interesting project. And I still think that would make a really good, interesting film. And as I said, HBO, I worked on a few projects with them, and they were great. They were really good. They were taking chances and writing scripts that were of limited interest to the HBO audience at the time. But that was great for me. From Phoenix, from the disaster beginning, it really worked out so that I was able to work on some great projects. And not all of them, they were not like great, was really good, like unicorn in a way. And it's still a shame that such a clear, simple allegory.
You said your fellow former student and coworker read about this and was like, oh, you're perfect for this. You like bleak material. How did you get that reputation? And do you actually really enjoy bleak material?
Yeah, I would say bleak, but I always say to people in Hollywood, tragedies win awards, comedies make money. And I was always more interested in tragedies. I don't know why, but I've always, The Godfather being the peak example of great tragedies in the Aristotelian sense. And so doesn't mean someone dies in the end. But that's just always what I've liked. And the couple of films I wrote, short films I wrote while I was at USC, there was one set in the 14th century of this knight, and I got a little buzz at the time, and fellow students were, well, I think they enjoyed it because it was a tragic, big historical story shot in 20 minutes in film school. And I don't know, those are just the kind of stories that interest me. I love a good comedy in the Aristotelian sense, not necessarily funny. But I think that there's, I don't know, something is attracted to stories where characters pay a bigger price than they expected to pay. And when I teach film, I always tell my students, look at the films that win big awards. They're usually tragedies. And look at the films that make money, Star Wars, Jaws, and such. They're all comedies. And that's fine. It's a place for both. But I'm just attracted to characters who have flaws that are brought down. Don't ask me why. I don't know. Maybe it's watching too much Dark Victory with my mom or something. I remember watching Midnight Cowboy back when I was probably came out 70 or so, and just being floored by it. That storytelling. That's storytelling. And I still always have respect thinking I'm working on the background. And for better or worse, several of them are indeed about characters who pay a price. Unfortunately, and I don't want to get out of my soapbox here, those are tragedies. Aristotelian tragedies are pretty rare. The entire Marvel subculture, I just don't get those films. Just don't get them. But there are still some filmmakers out there who understand storytelling in a deep way. They're getting older. Scorsese is still a genius. He's getting older. But I think that there's still some sense that there are other kinds of stories. There are ones that have numbers in the time. And I'd love to work on some of those projects. And as I said, I'm always working on a couple of spec ideas. But it's tough. Not only has the business changed since the graphic novel comic book world came out, which is kind of when I left Hollywood, mid-2000s. And then the whole streaming world, I missed that entirely. That's really changed things in COVID, so I don't even recognize Hollywood. I have an agent apparently somewhere. I think it's still out there, but I don't know who's buying stuff. It's really crazy upside down world. It was great to see Netflix and them for a decade pouring money into projects. That was great. Some really good stuff. But now that seems to have dried up. So, yeah, you probably have a better sense of the business, how the business is changing. But yeah, I don't know who makes those kind of HBO type films. Kind of was Netflix for a while, Hulu, but yeah, who does it in studios? Gosh, studios, wow. I mean, these horror film studios, interesting because they've carved out a space for them in the horror genre, and some horror films are interesting. Ari Aster's a pretty talented filmmaker, and Mike Flanagan's pretty talented too. Those are interesting, but they're just such a narrow genre, such a fine line between that and the torture porn. It is really tough to walk that line. I just watched Heretic, and you could see a really interesting idea there, and then just falls into goopy guts. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Real small, mid-budget, not necessarily mid-budget, but just dramas and tragedies that aren't based on dry historical, like English history. That we're going to do something historical. Find it interesting. As I said, the Lockerbie playing disaster, that was a great watch. Enjoyed that. And that was stuff with him. I see that they just came out with that. The Lockerbie one it was on one of the streamers. And it was interesting actually because they chose the point of view of one of the parents, and I chose the point of view of the cop. But hey, yeah, because it was shock.
There's not a lot I can ask you about your physics class, but I'm curious, do you have any sort of specialties when it comes to the film classes that you teach?
I'm now in a small town. I live in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and it's about as far from Holland as you get. But I do teach a class. We have some young students. There's some high school kids. I really enjoy taking young people and teaching them what film is, because this is their idea of film, right? And to really preach about what film really is and storytelling is and visual storytelling, I think that's a lot of fun. So we work with a lot of younger kids and some older and just try to get them to think visually and write visually. And it's tough. Boy, it's tough these days. Even if it's Netflix with beautiful cinematography, it's still a dialogue-based class. Still, I tell my students, that when you watch Netflix, even the best things on Netflix, you keep the lights on in the room. You wouldn't do that in a movie theater, would you? And because you're listening, basically not really watching. You're enjoying the pictures, but you're really listening. So I like to get on my soapbox and talk about visual storytelling. They're mostly young, all of me. I mean, their stories are sometimes a little wrong. But I enjoy that, and it's fun to proselytize filmmaking. I absolutely believe that film is a quintessentially American and French art form that will never be crushed. COVID won't kill it. Streaming won't kill it. Nothing's going to kill it. We love to hear stories. And I think it's essential that we feed that love as much as we can, and not by doing Spider-Man 12 or something. So, yeah, it's a chance for me to spread the gospel about filming a little bit. But yeah, it's far from all. It's far. Although it's interesting because I sometimes go as a student in these, and storytelling hasn't changed in 75 years. It's still all the same. I try to watch all the Oscar-nominated shorts each year, and there's some good ones and bad ones, but nothing has changed. Just the technology. They're all shot beautiful, 2K, and great sound, and beautifully lit, but the stories are still could be for 100 years. Yeah, no, The Brave was a great experience and a horrible experience. And to be honest, I wouldn't have it any other way. Of course, I would have it for people involved in tragedy, but personally, I think it was a great experience to learn. And as I said, I like tragedies. There you go. It confirmed my worldview that bad things can happen. Bad things can happen. It's a Godfather. Best of intentions can lead to the worst of outcomes sometimes. And I'm ready to go to my soapbox, but we're living in interesting times.
Thank you so much, Mr. McCudden. It's great talking with you.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And as I said, get in touch with me anytime.
All right, we are back, and we were talking about The Brave, and yeah, watching some of those clips from Cannes, it did not seem like Depp had a good time making this movie. He just kept talking about how hard it was and how hard it was directing himself and just not really enjoying it. I know he had done a couple shorts and some music videos. I think he's done music videos since this period from 97, but I guess he just got kind of scared off of it. And apparently the reason that we don't have the movie in this country is because of that critical reaction that happened after the Cannes screening and just all of the reviews that were coming out just lambasting this film. And I just don't think it's that bad. I agree with you, Spencer. It does feel very student filmish, but the oddest thing was that there were so many critics who were really on top of Depp because he was showing his body. And they're just like, oh, it's just all of these close-ups of him and he's so handsome and all this. I'm like, yeah, and basically like that's the only thing this man has left in the world is his body. So why wouldn't you kind of fetishize that with this film? Because that is ultimately what he is selling to this underground establishment, or to the, to the entire world. I mean, basically Depp is useless to anybody. His character is useless to anybody other than the person who wants to buy him to kill him.
Even within a plot that is about fetishizing his body, I had read that before I saw the film, and then I was surprised to find out, but wait, he's walking around with his shirt open in a really hot place and also conjuring the movie image of the brave, that kind of a filmic iconography. And it just did not seem that much. This is like a director with an actor. Just compare this movie to like The Place Beyond the Pines. And the way that Ryan Gosling's body is constantly fetishized and built up in the first big chunk of that film, Depp is not doing anything near that to his own body, when certainly the themes of the film could do that, could justify it. So I find that to be odd and bogus. Again, if we want to have a fight with it, it's that goes along with when he played Tonto, that more problematic way of taking on a very traditional indigenous iconography that's been very much controlled by white people and fetishized by white people. And so that just raises the question of how much is critique and how much is it just playing out the cliche? I think that's an argument worth having, but yeah, it's really strange to me that they needed to make a case against that was personal. It's certainly possible to dislike the movie, but just treat it like this ultimate bad object and treat Depp so poorly at that time as a director, the kind of how dare you. I find this to be like, since we were talking about this at the very beginning, Mike, the kinds of films that generate these sorts of responses at film festivals, yes, sure, quite often they're bad, but they're often like bad in ways that are not nearly so terrible as people say. I personally happen to like Southland's Tales, and I know plenty of people who don't, and that's fine. We can disagree, but Southland Tales is not some kind of crime against aesthetics. And honestly, when I first saw it, I expected it to be much, much crazier in some way. So my point here being, I do think that these kinds of movies are really interesting to look at because they are actually quite revealing about the, frankly, very staid and conservative standards for cinema at whatever moment that they are unleashed upon an unsuspecting Cannes or Sundance or Telluride audience, that they become an outrage.
I think the movie's definitely going to have a rediscovery at some point, if nothing else, just upon the incredible cast. When you got all of those guys, Marshall Bell, Frederick Forrest, Clarence Williams, Luis Guzman, and then Max Perlich, and all the cameos in there. People are going to find it. It'll someday have a U.S. release, I'm confident. To your point, Spencer, I think people will say, what was going on? What was in the water in 97 that this was so reviled? And honestly, maybe it's Depp. Maybe he'd never had that kind of response. Maybe he was particularly vulnerable. And had he released this in the U.S., that rediscovery or possible reclamation may have already happened by now. I'm glad that he was able to, especially because it sounds like he put a lot of his own money into the production, knowing that it wasn't going to be made back. I think it's great that he was able to say, fine, fuck it. You don't deserve it. I'm not going to let you see it.
And to the point of putting in his own money, that's mentioned in, I forget which source, but one of the stories about how this film was losing its way in the world back at the time just tosses off that Depp committed the ultimate cinema sin of putting his own money into the movie. And I just have to say, fuck off to all that. Not just because there have been a number of movies where people put in their own money. I guess that's also one of the knocks on Orson Welles, which I refuse to take. Yeah, okay. So he put some of his own money into a bunch of his films and nobody else made F for Fake. Fuck off with that. But then also it's like one of those things too, where it's like even somebody wealthy and influential like Depp has to be taken down a peg for doing the thing that people from much less lofty backgrounds have to do in order to get a film made at all, so that then they can get into the world of auditioning to get somebody else to pay for their movie on many levels. I think that's really strange and problematic. I also, you mentioned, Jed, the performances, and this is a really rare late Brando performance where he's not trying to torment the director. If like the other movies that he did at this point in his career, he was doing crazy stuff and getting people fired and refused to call Frank Oz anything but Miss Piggy when they were on the set of The Score, and also wouldn't wear pants so that they would have to photograph him only from the chest up most of the time. Brando actually on Good Behavior, and I'm not going to say that this is an amazing performance from him, but I do think that there's something valuable if you're interested in Brando as an actor and as a figure, and certainly I am, to see a performance from this point of his career when he did actually show up to work and not just see what he could get away with, like on Island of Lost Souls, for instance.
That was the year before, was when he was getting Richard Stanley fired.
There was more Val Kilmer, actually. But yeah, what a disaster there. But yeah, definitely Brando's behavior did not recommend him on that particular film.
As far as the fetishization of Depp, going back to what we were talking about before the break, I think the only real fetishy type scene, it plays into the narrative. Like towards the end, after he kills Guzman, he goes to see the Floyd Red Crow Westerman character, and he takes him in, cleans him up, and there's a shot of Depp coming out of this water in the moonlight, and you get to see his body and everything. And it's just like, okay, but not only are they showing you his body, but they're showing you this huge cut that he has on his chest. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this isn't just like, look at how beautiful this man is, because Johnny Depp was/is possibly a beautiful man, just an absolutely gorgeous guy to look at. You know, he's one of these guys who just had that about him, and he was such a pleasure to look at, and he was such a pleasure to watch. And the thing, and I probably have said this before on the show, and if so, I apologize. The thing I always liked about Depp is that he was not just a pretty boy actor. Like, he could have easily have parlayed the success that he had on 21 Jump Street into a whole bunch of plain old leading man characters. But what does he do? He goes out and he makes frickin' Crybaby. He makes Edward Scissorhands. He's making Arizona Dream. You know, he's doing these challenging films. I mean, What's Eating Gilbert Grape? It might have been the first Lasse Hallström film in the U.S. He's making Ed Wood, the way that he ties his star together with Tim Burton. I mean, he's playing with all of these very interesting directors for the longest time. I mean, you mentioned Terry Gilliam before, that he comes back and does part of the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus and stuff. It's like, yeah, that's great. Like, of course, I think he probably should have broken with Burton a little bit earlier. Like, nobody needed that Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Nobody needed Alice in Wonderland. Nobody needed Dark Shadows. You know, the list goes on and on. It's like, please unhitch your star at some point. But even when it comes to like the stuff that he's doing, you know, like he had Viklo Filak as one of his two DPs on this movie, who he had met on Arizona Dream. And it's like, that's great. Like, he's taking all of this talent. I mean, fucking Iggy Pop is the one that does the soundtrack. He probably met him on Crybaby because Iggy Pop had that small role in Crybaby. I remember him sitting in that tub scrubbing his back and stuff. I mean, Dead Man. I mean, yeah, working with Jarmusch is a fantastic thing. He's working with all of these great directors from all over the world. And yeah, it's just amazing that he was doing that. And I remember telling the story before about, when young girls would come into the movie theater buying tickets to go see Crybaby. And I'm like, this is a John Waters film. Like, you probably will not enjoy this, but they were all for it because it was Johnny Depp. We had so many complaints, so many refunds because girls just thought that they were going to see beautiful Johnny Depp on screen, not hatchet face, not, what they ended up seeing on screen. It was so wonderful. I loved it so much. And yeah, I just always appreciated that about Depp in these early days. And I don't know if, to your point, if they were just kind of the critics laying in wait for this guy who just seemed to be making a lot of really interesting choices with his early career.
This is an eccentric film, but I think one interesting thing about this is that this is a little bit more in the Gilbert Grape territory as a performance. Johnny Depp has made an incredible career of weirdo roles. Strange, restrained, heightened, mannered kinds of performances. This is one of the more restrained and recognizably human performances from him. And I think it's a really excellent one. There is a kind of blankness built into the character, but what gives us is a lot of sense of thoughtfulness of someone who is at once not necessarily very smart, but who is presented with a lot of situations where he is kind of very desperately thinking and feeling on screen. And also, he didn't have an expert director. He was not used to working with first-time directors. And here he's doing both of these things. And I think that might really contribute to having made a first feature that it's enough to break anyone. And if you come back for another round, that is something. So it's very hard on the most basic level. But yeah, for him to act in this and direct it, and it is an elaborate production for the budget and everything. I'm really not surprised that it was an unpleasant shoot for him. And I think it's unfortunate that he didn't direct again, but there we are. I barely want to mention this because I don't pay attention to it myself, but in terms of the future fortunes of this, I'm with you, Jed. I think it's ready for reevaluation, but I wonder how many people are going to be ready to reevaluate it after a grotesque and awful divorce that got a lot of attention. I'm personally not a Calvinist, so I can't quite see the sort of the sin back to the point when Depp made this movie. And I'm not really interested in playing those games with how we evaluate art. But I do think that this is like a really strange and challenging movie that's ripe for reappraisal for the brave, if you will.
We mentioned it very early on. I don't really want to get into all of the details of this, but I would recommend if people want to know more, especially Paul McCudden mentions this, all of the things with Aziz Ghazal, one of the original producers of this film. That is a bizarre and gruesome story. And what I was reading about him, he was very not healthy, and that he murdered his wife and one of his daughters before killing himself. So that was in 93, I think. And that almost put this project completely off the rails because it was supposed to start in 94. That it ever got made at all, that they were able to come back from that. Like you said, I think this is kind of a cursed film because there was that whole thing could just, a lot of times, oh yeah, we're supposed to do this movie. One of the producers murdered two people, his family, and killed himself. Normally that just puts the whole project in turnaround forever, but it's amazing that this ever actually got to the screen.
I guess the curse extends in that the say problematic a bunch of times, but that just goes with the territory when the people generating the project are not indigenous people dealing with and commenting upon issues of an indigenous genocide. There's, I suppose, also that behind it. And again, a tradition in filmmaking and in art making more generally that is a problem, but I think also a problem that deserves any number of responses. And in particular, since the time that this was made, thankfully, there are a lot more indigenous filmmakers making their comments and telling stories from their experiences out of a truly horrifying history that unfortunately is too close for comfort in our current moment. Yeah, I guess there is also that. That's a lot of curse. I do really think it's a worthy object to wrestle with. This is not just some terrible film that nobody should ever acknowledge. And that's very much how it's been treated. And I think that's unfortunate. I was really pleasantly surprised because there are cases where there isn't something to rescue in a movie that's known to be really bad, much as one might want to. I guess I'll throw out as an example, maybe the new director's cut of Blair Witch 2 Book of Shadows is a vast improvement. Much as try as I did back in the early 2000s to watch that movie and try to rehabilitate it to no avail, that's unfortunately just a bad movie. I don't know that it's quite so terrible. It's just boring, quite so terrible as a lot of people said at the time. But some movies, yeah, sure, you can't recover when you're going diving for outrages. But this is definitely one that I think is worth a look and worth some attention.
I kind of wish that there was a proper version of The Lone Ranger, because I've read that Elliot and Rossio script, which was so different than the movie. And if you watch the movie and know that the William Fichtner character is supposed to basically be like a flesh eater, and there were originally much more mysticism. There were werewolves in it. The whole thing with the silver bullets actually played out with the werewolf stuff. It's just like, that was such a much more interesting movie than what we ended up with, which it's a flawed film. But then, like, now talk about, that word that we hate so much, problematic, to have Armie Hammer and Johnny Depp in the same movie. Oh my God. Next thing you know, Kevin Spacey shows up and you're just like, oh my God, what is happening here? I definitely agree that Depp deserved a little bit better than just having this completely lambasted by critics. And I think more people should check this out. It's not the best movie in the world, but it doesn't deserve this kind of lost status that it has here in the States. All right, guys, let's go ahead and take another break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
But Eve, we've given you everything you've ever wanted. How can you do this to us?
Left this nice house, your own car, a swimming pool. What more do you want?
I want to be a star.
Hello, Lily Parrington.
I'm finally going to meet a real man.
Richard Nixon is a lesbian. I didn't know that.
That's right, we will be back next week with a look at Scarecrow in a Garden of Cucumbers. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts Jedidiah and Spencer. So Jedidiah, what's been keeping you busy these days?
Just watching movies. You want to know anything about it, you can find me on Letterboxd, Jedidiah Ayres, but I'm not on any other social media at the time.
I am following you on Letterboxd, my friend, and it's always great to see what you're up to. And Spencer, what's the latest with you?
I am finding my way into editing whenever I can, so I can finally have a movie done and move on to making the next one.
Well, I look forward to seeing it. Can you invite me to the premiere when that happens?
For sure. Yeah, you're on the comp list for the premiere, for sure.
Well, thank you again, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projectionbooth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.